Oxygent, a short story by Herbert Howard Jones. Carrie was definitely a romantic. She was also inclined to make general statements about life which didn't gel with reality. At least not in my mind. She once declared that falling in love and being in love were definitely two different things, but falling in love was more powerful. I sort of went along with that. She also said that the gravitational pull of the Earth aided and abetted the romantic process, which I thought sounded doubtful. But I had an open mind. The sad thing was that she had decided that it was practically over between us. She needed time to think about our relationship, which was going in the wrong direction. Her words, not mine, which was why she suddenly found herself interested in this government-sponsored program designed to fight the effects of climate change. It would mean, in effect, taking a sabbatical from me. I would fight back by trying to distract her. What's love and gravity got to do with each other? I asked. Gravity is magnetic, isn't it? She said, trying to find some scientific justification for her far-out ideas. It flows through us and our emotions get caught up in it. I think gravity is the source of all emotions. Holding a glass of vodka, she gave me that half-drunken look which glazed-eyed drunks give you when they're trying to focus. And sure enough, I felt pulled towards her. But then I always did. She had been the center of my life for the last 3 years. What are you trying to tell me? I asked. I've decided that I'm going to do it, she said, taking a sip of her drink. I'm going green air. If it saves the planet, I'll do it. And it doesn't mean I don't love you. Gravity will always be there for us. It will keep our love alive. Honey, there's no proof that the green air program actually works or that it will save the planet, I said. It depends how many people are in each batch, she said. I'll be joining one on the East Coast. I still have to choose which, though. I shook my head. Forget it. It's harebrained. You can't boost Earth's oxygen levels by putting 1 million people into a temporary coma. It would only reduce the CO2 in the atmosphere by a fraction, if at all. They actually need to start manufacturing oxygen itself and reducing industrial emissions as a whole. And the sea is also a culprit. Do you realize how many tons of CO2 the sea creates a year? But you just want to do it for the money, don't you? Well, there is that, she replied. $1 million isn't to be sneezed at. But there's no guarantee that they'll be able to bring you around afterwards, I said. They've been cases where the process triggers a negative reaction. The body tries to somehow adapt to the long coma that they induce, and people have died. Coming around after a long sleep can be traumatic. It's frankly irresponsible. This idea of being put to sleep for 4 years in order to reduce CO2 levels was another one of the government's desperate schemes to save the planet. All environment targets up to this point had so far not been met. And then one day a scientist laughingly said, just put 10 million people to sleep for 2 years and watch CO2 levels drop like a stone. I think it was supposed to be a joke, but it got some traction with the environmental lobby. Before we knew it, it had been launched as a voluntary government-run program. The idea was they put you in a sort of solar-powered cryogenic chamber for 4 years, along with 5 million other people in order to preserve breathable air. Breathable air had become the buzzword of the decade, the phrase most bandied around. The catch was that they only paid you after they brought you out of the coma, and you didn't have any right to compensation if you died. It would mean leaving your friends and family behind, but you wouldn't age and you'd have the benefit of future medicine. A lot could happen in 4 years. Your $1 million would be put into an interest-earning account from day one, but no one could access it until they brought you round. But I didn't want her to go. I'd be kicking my heels for 4 years waiting to see her again. We were supposed to be in a relationship. Of course, I could theoretically always join her in the program, but it would depend on my blood type, race, and ancestry. What I thought was suspicious was that they only accepted you if your parents were deceased and if you lived in an urban area and owned property. Also, homeless people were not accepted, or if you had a mental illness or similar condition. However, if you had a history of taking medicine for depression, that was fine. There was also a lot of red tape and legalese to digest, and you needed a guarantor, and they had to be a professional person of some sort. Also, they had the right to pull the plug on you in consultation with a doctor, should there be any medical complications. To hell with that. It all sounded like a setup. I remember when the idea was first muted publicly, she was against it. Then someone she knew did it, and it all worked out fine, and she bought a house in Malibu afterwards. Sounded like easy money. Time goes just like that, her friend had told her. And now I've got all this lovely money to spend, tax-free. People were also saying that it had changed their lives for the better. Someone with throat cancer saw it go into remission. But who knows, these stories could have been made up. Listen, I said reasonably. They may bring you back okay, but you might not love me anymore. Or I might have found someone else. That is one of the risks, she said. I know that, but that would be mainly down to you. Sea time will fly by for me, but you would have to deal with the waiting. The government had warned they were risks. They even suggested there might be a nuclear war while you're asleep and the facility could be destroyed even if it was based in a mountain complex. But just think, touch wood, I'd be coming out to cleaner air, she said. Since the program has begun, the air is quantifiably cleaner. By only a small fraction if at all, I said sourly. And I'd miss you badly. To hell with cleaner air. But as I said, she had been against it at the beginning. She was mainly against it for the reasons I was against it. We were basically in love and were planning to have kids. But also, she didn't need the money. She had a good job, and had been given assurances that her job would still be there waiting for her. In the tabloids, there was always a positive story about the program with people claiming all sorts of good, sometimes amazing things about it. It seemed like the press cherry-picked these stories. But there were also the odd tale about corruption too in the tell-all rags, though these stories didn't hit mainstream headlines. The bad news was being glossed over, no doubt about it. And from what I could see, the program mainly targeted the rich, and there had to be a reason for that. Was it that the government simply wanted to recoup their promised $1 million from the inevitable fatalities? I learned that not everyone could survive protracted cryonic suspension. The temperature is taken down to -196 Celsius. Too low for my hot blood, and come to think about it, too low for hers, although I jest. But surely even if there had been one death, it was one death too many. The government appeared to be very cavalier about it. When I brought the subject of the risks up, she said she didn't want to know. But a look did pass over her face. I think I was slowly getting through that stubborn skull of hers. If you really loved me, you wouldn't go through with it, I ventured. If you loved me, you wouldn't try to hold me back, she countered. We talked about it for months, but she had already signed up, and her name was on the waiting list. In a way, it was like booking an appointment with destiny or death, only nothing was guaranteed. The disclaimers on the forms were frightening and written in the smallest print possible. But she seemed oblivious. Who bothers to read the reams and reams of small print that comes with social media accounts? I think she might have glanced over the first page of the 50-page document, possibly. Aside from that, life continued as normal. She still went to ballet classes, drank like a fish, and occasionally joined her next-door neighbor for an early morning jog. She made no attempt to change her diet, which had been recommended by the program. You'd think a jogger would know better. But as she explained it, jogging made binging viable. And it certainly explained why she was still so slim. You might miss that when you're asleep, I said. Jogging? I'll be dreaming about it probably, she replied. Well, suppose I tell you I'm going to leave you if you go on the program. Whatever, she answered. It would bother me, but I'd understand. And probably after 4 years we would have grown apart a bit anyhow, even if I have been asleep. Emotional growing doesn't just stop when they put you under. You've got an answer for everything, I said. She looked at me. Not everything. I've noticed that not one politician has been reported entering the program. Plenty of celebs have, though. There you are, I replied. Doesn't that tell you something? But as I said, she had been against it at the beginning. However, despite my misgivings, Carrie seemed determined to go through with the program, and eventually her number came up. The program told her to request forms from the official office in San Diego to complete her sign-up and acceptance forms. She had 30 days to comply. She had been officially approved, her medical records checked out, and a vitrification chamber had been reserved for her at the Mount McKinley Cryogenic Center in Alaska. Vitrification chambers had replaced the old cryogenic ones because they were safer. It was all good to go. She also had to do a 5-day home induction before going on the program, and for that, all she had to do was follow along with a DVD. This was an interactive DVD which came out in 2030 and had an AI chip in it which could talk and respond to you like an intelligent person. It was similar to the old exercise videos, only filled with chats by experts and advice from program doctors. Out of curiosity, I did it with her. Once you put the DVD on, it took over. Both Carrie and I sat down on the sofa with the DVD in the player and followed along. The presentation was very slick. The lady program director came on and apparently spoke to us, and you could actually ask her questions. When is the $1 million actually going to be put into my account? Carrie asked as she sat stuffing her face from a big packet of tortilla chips. She had a little pot of relish next to her on the sofa. The director blinked her eyes on the screen. Before I answer that, I just want to express my wish that you will be following our dietary advice before embarking on the program proper. Both Carrie and I were gobsmacked. Can you actually see me eating? Carrie said. She looked at me. Can DVDIS see you? No, replied the director. But a lot of people are in the habit of eating stodgy food while watching TV, so I'm just saying in passing. Please follow our dietary advice for a smooth and happy experience. What about the money? I prompted. Participants get their money as soon as they are allocated a vitrification chamber, which in your case has already happened, the director said. That's what I thought, Carrie replied. But when I checked my bank account this morning, there was no sign of it. No sign of the money, you mean? The director queried. That is correct, Carrie answered. Don't worry, the director replied. There was such a take-up that a number of transfers were delayed. I will immediately send out a reminder to our International Accounts Department. Thank you, Carrie said. And is there any possible chance that I can have an advance on that money? Say $10,000. Normally no, the director replied. But in special circumstances we can advance up to $5,000, but this is repayable with interest. However, you will have to go online to make the application at ACC. ACC? What does that stand for? I asked. That's the Alaska Cryogenics Center, Carrie answered. She had been doing some homework. Correct, said the director. Now people often ask, what can I do to ensure that I have an optimal suspension? Here's a checklist of important steps to take into consideration. First, become a funded member through life insurance, the director said. Make sure you keep us informed on a regular basis about your health status or accommodation address changes. Keep your family and friends, doctor, lawyer, and funeral director up to date on your wishes to be cryopreserved. Prepare and execute a living will and power of attorney for general and specific health care requirements which reflects your cryonics-related wishes. Always at all times wear your cryonics bracelet or necklace identifying you and your wishes should you become incapacitated. Keep your program wallet card on your person as well. If you can't speak for yourself, a medical bracelet can help save your life if things go wrong, which practically never happens. The bracelet also has a DNA sample embedded in it for emergencies. So what's the difference between a cryogenics chamber and a vitrification chamber? Good question, the director replied. Vitrification is an alternative approach to cryopreservation which enables hydrated human cells to be cooled to very cold cryogenic temperatures without the need to use ice. Unlike traditional freezing methods, vitrification eliminates mechanical injury from ice, such as injury to the brain. It also eliminates the need to find optimal cooling and warming rates. By and large, it simplifies the process for various human and animal biological systems. However, it requires higher concentrations of various cryoprotectants, which come with risks of osmotic damage and toxicity. The risk of brain damage could compromise your personality and memories. I guess that, Carrie replied. Is it possible to fall out of love with somebody? We often get asked about emotional matters like that, the director replied. If your memory of a person is completely wiped out, as in dementia cases, then yes. But so far that has only been theoretical. There are currently no instances of that actually happening on the program. Carrie nodded and looked at me. You got a question? Will I be able to keep in contact with Carrie while she is suspended? I asked. I mean, could I visit her where her chamber is based? I know I wouldn't be able to speak to her, but maybe just to see her. The director paused for a long moment. This too is a common question, but you have to appreciate that the partners, friends, and relatives of program participants are all keen to see their loved ones. But if we open the floodgates to visitors, we wouldn't be able to accommodate them all. The various cryogenic campuses around the country are large but relatively limited in size. So we have a sister service called Keep in Touch, which runs alongside the main program and provides you with weekly emails and texts and general updates so that authorized persons can keep abreast of how their loved one is doing. We also have staff on hand to respond to any queries you may have. I nodded my head. That's good to know. So I will have to go to the campus in Alaska? Carrie asked. Well, technically speaking, it's an installation, but yes, the director replied. The exact location is named in your personalized handbook, which came with this DVD. Handbook? Carrie said. I don't think I was sent it. I will check on that, the director replied, and get back to you in 72 hours. See, it is important to follow the pre-suspension guidelines in the handbook, particularly concerning food. But to summarize, you were advised not to consume any alcohol, nicotine, or take patent medications, such as painkillers, analgesics, or SEDs. Prescribed medications will be administered as per your doctor's recommendations during your period of suspension. So what can I eat in the meantime? Carrie asked. During the run-up to the actual suspension, which we call pre-phase 1, you are advised not to eat hard cheese, beef, lamb or pork, or drink alcohol as mentioned, and keep your sugar intake to a minimum and consume mainly vegetables and high-fiber carbs. Chicken and plant-based meat substitutes are allowed. The pre-phase period has already begun and lasts 2 weeks. Carrie gave me a startled look. Oh, so what happens in 2 weeks? It's all in the documentation we sent you, the director replied. With the handbook. But I just told you I didn't get the handbook, Carrie said. I apologize for that, the director said. I will make that a priority. You've already completed the forms the San Diego office sent you last week, otherwise I wouldn't be talking to you now. But technically 2 days of pre-phase have already elapsed, and so there are only 12 days to go. However, at the end of the pre-phase 1 period, lasting normally 2 weeks, you are to present yourself to the Mount McKinley Cryogenic Center in Alaska. The time of your appointment will be verified 3 days before you arrive by text, email, and phone. When you arrive, you will go to the registration office and from there on to the induction suite. Any persons accompanying you will be unable to join you in the induction suite and will have to leave the center. Will Carrie be able to phone me? Or could I phone her? I asked. Not once she enters the induction suite, the director replied. That's when the program proper commences. Within 5 hours, she will be in deep suspension. All personal phones will have to be surrendered to security on arrival, including those of visitors. It will be a federal offense to attempt to smuggle a phone beyond Gate 4, which leads to the induction suite. The government makes no bones about prosecuting offenders, and that includes the individuals who either bring a phone into the center beyond Gate 4 and those on the outside phoning in. I believe the penalty is up to 3 years in jail. That's a bit draconian, I said. Rather harsh. All these conditions are in the best interest of the program, the director said. And also because mobile phones use microwave technology. Don't forget, mobile phones can't be used on aircraft. After another half an hour of this, my brain began to switch off. From what I could see, everything about this program was almost taking a mandatory form which could become law in a few years' time. The idea of making the use of mobile phones on the premises a federal offense seemed a step too far. It appeared that the authorities wanted to be firmly in control, and there was a scary suggestion that when you joined the program you were giving up some of your basic rights. "Suppose I haven't made a will yet?" Carrie asked. "You've still got a week to organize that," the director said bluntly. When Carrie and I ran out of questions, I could also tell that Carrie was running out of enthusiasm. I was surprised when she said, "Suppose I change my mind about going on the program?" There was a pause, and the director said, "Could your question be because you are concerned about getting paid?" I did say that we could arrange an interim loan in certain circumstances. "That's not quite the same as an advance," I said. "Not if she has to pay it back with interest. If you're going to give her $1 million at the end of the period of suspension anyway, why not give her an interest-free advance?" "This is an issue you can take up with the program coordinators whenever you wish," the director replied. "But for the time being, those are the terms and conditions as they currently are. If you are in urgent need of finance, I can look into that for you. I understand that you own your own apartment. Participants who are single are normally advised to sell their property or have it managed by a friend or relative or other agency, or have the program manage it for you for a very reasonable monthly fee. I understand that you share your home with your partner." "Yes," Carrie said, but she seemed troubled. "Wait a minute," I said. "How can a person in cryogenic suspension and obviously not working afford to pay out a property management fee?" "It's deducted from the $1 million at the end of the period of cryogenic suspension," the director said. "And it includes a fixed rate of interest which varies according to inflation. Currently it's about 3%. "Well, it's a service we don't need, as I will be paying the bills," I said. There was another pause, and the director said, "Fine. I will look into the queries you have raised with me and get back to you. Another thing I'd like to suggest is to try and do a little running or jogging or some other form of daily cardiovascular exercise, as it will help with adjustment before you enter the program." "I already do a little jogging round the park," Carrie said. "Excellent," the director said. "I will arrange for a confirmation of when our facility will be expecting you. And I can definitely confirm now that it will be up at Mount McKinley." "Thank you," Carrie said. "Thank you, and have a nice day," the director said, and the DVD closed itself down. "Just to remind you that we were just talking to a DVD," I said as I stared at the blank TV screen. "Do you think anyone up at their head office actually heard us?" Carrie asked. "Probably," I replied. Carrie nodded. "Well, I've just made a decision. If they don't give me the loan, I'm not going. Also, I just find it hard to believe that they'll give me the full amount after the program. They'll find some loophole not to. I mean, my account should already be credited with the money, but it isn't. Must be a glitch," I said. "Well, they need to sort it out," Carrie replied. I looked at her. "And why do you need a loan anyway? You've only got a week or 10 days to go." "Just to see if they're going to pay me," Carrie replied. "Keep checking your account," I suggested. "I will," she replied. "I need to get a new bathrobe and stuff anyhow." "It won't cost $10,000, I said. She nodded. It turned out to be a very slow week, but her confirmation came through the next day. Her appointment was for 10 a.m., Tuesday week up at the Mount McKinley Cryogenic Center, Alaska, and we had to bring our passports. Mobile phones had to be left at the front desk. It amounted to half-day of traveling. I took strong objection to the mobile phone rule and hatched a plan. "So I want you to smuggle in your phone. Just wrap it in tinfoil so it can't be detected and smuggle it in the side of your boot." "You're kidding, right?" she said with a frown. "They're saying it's a federal offense and they're bound to make you walk through a detector like they have at airports." "The tin foil will conceal it," I said. "Or we could cut a section out of the sole of your boot and put it in there. I mean, your phone is so small I think we could get away with it." Carrie sighed. "If you're going to do it at all, maybe hide it in the sole if you can cut out a section. But I'm going to be worrying, and when could I use it? They say I'll be in suspension on the same day we say goodbye, so it's hardly worth the effort. Maybe I can use one of their official phones to say goodbye." "I've got a scalpel, so I should be able to do it," I replied. "But you can hardly phone me when I'm in suspension," she stated. "True," I said, "but I'd feel better knowing that I'll have a direct line to you." But what good is it if I'm frozen solid and unconscious, she said. And don't forget, this isn't like cryogenics used to be. You had to be dead, I believe, before they took you on. But this is a completely different type of program. They're freezing you while you're still alive. Yes, I have been thinking about that, I said. In the old days, the idea was to bring you round after death when the future had a cure for you. To be honest, I don't know how they're going to keep you asleep for so long. Suppose you wake up in the middle of the program. If you're trying to put me off, you're doing a good job, she said. Are you sure they only froze dead people? Weren't some still alive but only very sick? I don't know for sure, I said. And is there any evidence that any of the dead clients of the old system have ever been revived? I said. I think it's a big scam. You can't bring people back from the dead. But maybe they can revive you on this program because you won't be dead, she said. I took a deep breath. Where are your boots? I asked. I'm going to see if I can cut a section out for your phone. In the upstairs wardrobe, she answered. But I haven't agreed yet. The last thing either of us need is a federal conviction. About 10 days later, Carrie and I stood before the sleek, silver doors of the McKinley Cryogenic Center in Alaska. Actually, it was so cold up there that you didn't need to sit in a chamber. You could just lay under a pile of snow. We were at an official clean air facility, one of 100 or so all over the United States. I don't know about her, but my heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Paradoxically, the air was crisp, and the sky a clear blue, as if the world was trying to tell you that ambient oxygen levels were really quite fine. As we entered the facility, Carrie surrendered her phone, the substitute we planted to take the place of the phone I had put in the sole of her boot. They also temporarily took my phone to be returned when I left. We were greeted by a team of experts and taken to a comfortable private lounge area that had sofas in it and blinds over the windows. The team then explained the procedure. We were now quite familiar with it. Carrie would be placed in a state of suspended animation, her biological functions slowed to a near halt. Her body would be preserved in a breathable liquid, rich in oxygen and nutrients, ensuring her cells remained alive and well. Will I at any time feel the cold? She asked. No, they answered. But I could see that Carrie wasn't convinced. The whole interview took about an hour, and it was clear that Carrie was now quite terrified at the prospect of spending 4 years in a chamber. The fact that she would be unconscious was no reassurance. The one thing the team did mention, which was new, as far as the program was concerned, was that she would have positive dreams. While she was in suspension, hypnotic suggestions would be played to her focusing on positive outcomes. They were particularly concerned with her mood and the eradication of anything of a negative nature. It guaranteed a happy period of suspension. At least this is what the team said. However, Carrie's mind had changed. She wanted out. Everyone was surprised, especially me. Look, I'm sorry to have wasted your time, she said hesitantly to the group. But I don't think I'm quite ready for this yet. That's quite a normal reaction, the lady doctor said. It's a bit like people at the altar getting cold feet. No pun intended. I mean, it is quite a leap of faith. Exactly, I said, chipping in. What we do in these circumstances is give the potential participants a tour of the facility and treat them to either a breakfast or lunch. It gives us a chance to discuss the other benefits of the program. Normally, we are able to get them to see that there is really nothing to fear. Plus, there's the added bonus of a big payday at the end of it all. Will I be able to join you? I asked. The team looked at each other. I'm afraid not. Friends or spouses around have a tendency to distract the person about to embark on suspension. No one can go through Gate 4 unless they've signed up for the program. You will have to wait in the visitors area, I'm afraid. Carrie looked at me. Would you mind? I shrugged. It depends on how you feel about it. Carrie sighed. I'd like to hear about their investment program. You'll be entitled to lunch on us while you wait, the lady doctor told me. I think steak is on the menu today. I nodded. These people really knew how to press your buttons. Carrie gave me a little smile. Purely out of curiosity, I'd like to take the tour. But to be honest, I can't see myself going through with it. Sorry to have wasted everybody's time. The lady doctor smiled. That's entirely up to you. We'll simply give your spot to someone else. Carrie nodded and everyone stood up. But I wasn't feeling good about it. How long will the tour be? Just under an hour, the lady doctor said. We'll take you back to the visitors area now, and Carrie will be taken through to induction, although whether she continues will be up to her. One of the male members of the team smiled and waved his hand at me, and I went ahead of him back through the door I came in. Carrie gave me a grin. See you soon. Be good, I said and walked through the open door into the visitors area. Your name will be put on the lunch roster, the man said to me. The refectory is just over there past the reception desk. Thanks, I said and watched him re-enter the lounge. I don't know why, but I really didn't feel good about being separated from Carrie. It felt as if it had been engineered by them. They seemed determined not to take no for an answer, even though their approach was very softly. I looked at my watch and realized that it was virtually lunchtime, so I walked through to the refectory area. Everything up to that point seemed perfectly normal and relaxed, and the other visitors milling around the center appeared calm. It reminded me of a hospital setting. Sure enough, the catering staff at the refectory had my name down on their list, and there was waitress service. The tables had red and white checkered tablecloths on them, and a carafe of water and a small glass. However, when the meal arrived, it turned out to be gammon steak, not the beefsteak I was anticipating, and it came with fries and a ring of pineapple. I kept my eye on the time as I devoured my quite appetizing meal, and the hour passed really quickly. I decided not to have dessert, and without leaving a tip left the refectory and strolled quickly back to the door of the private lounge. I hung around for about 10 minutes before tapping on the door. There was no answer and no sign of Carrie either. I tried to catch the eye of a member of uniformed staff, but the woman hurried on past me. So I took matters into my hands and opened the lounge door and entered the room. It was completely empty. There were 2 other doors in the room, and I tried both, which were locked. I wondered whether I should ring Carrie's concealed phone in her boot, but she was bound to be with members of the team. Not a smart move. At this point, the member of staff whom I had tried to speak to earlier came into the room. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked. "I'm waiting for my friend." The woman nodded. "Okay, but would you mind waiting in the general reception area? What is your friend's name? I'll make an inquiry if you like." "That would be good," I replied. "Carrie Sarasun." "Okay, Carrie Sarasun?" She made a note on her phone. "That's Sarasun with 1 R?" "That's correct," I replied. "Okay, just come through and take a seat." I did as I was instructed and sat down in the reception area as the woman went to the main desk. After another 10 minutes, she returned. "Any luck?" I asked. "Miss Sarasun came in for the induction earlier this morning," the woman said. "Correct," I said. "And she was invited to do a tour." "That's right, but she then left the building," the woman said. I blinked. "What do you mean? She's left the building?" "She was due to participate in the program," the woman reiterated. "But for undisclosed reasons it was cancelled, and she is now no longer in the facility." I felt myself frowning. "But she wouldn't have left here without me," I said. The woman nodded. "Do you have a car?" "Yes," I replied. "We drove here." "Then I would suggest that she's probably sitting in your car waiting for you in the parking lot," the woman said. "But she doesn't have the keys," I said. "And I didn't see her leave." "There is a rear exit which takes you to the public parking area," the woman said. "I would suggest you pop out and have a look. I have been assured that she is no longer here." "Okay," I said. "Thank you. I'll go look. If there's a further problem, let me know," she said. I went out through the main entrance and could see my car immediately, parked up where we left it. There was clearly no one inside. I came storming back, and this was when I knew there was a problem. The security personnel wouldn't let me back in. "But I walked out of here just a second ago," I protested. "I'm here to collect my partner, Carrie Sarasun." "Yes, I know you left here about 2 minutes ago, the burly black security man said. I checked you out, but you don't have the authorization to come back in. You need a fresh pass. But we had one, I said. It was taken when we arrived this morning. Just 1 minute, the security man said. Your name? Rex Fields, and my partner's name is Carrie Saracen, and she was booked in for today. But I understand that she is no longer here, which doesn't make sense. The security man picked up his phone at his desk and spoke to someone. I have a Mr. Fields here who came with a Carrie Saracen who was booked in for today. But he no longer has an active pass. Do I have permission to allow him in? Mr. Fields tells me that he was informed that the lady he was with is no longer here at the facility, which he has an issue with. The person at the other end of the phone spoke for about half a minute, and then the security man put the receiver of his phone down. They tell me that Miss Carrie Saracen is definitely no longer here at the facility and was suddenly taken unwell and was rushed to the Charles Brook Clinic. Taken unwell? I repeated. I would suggest you go there, the security man said. I also still have your mobile phone, which you will have to sign for. He handed my phone to me and I signed a small docket. The clinic is in Anchorage, which is about a 2-hour drive. Anchorage, I stuttered. But why didn't they inform me? The security man shrugged. Why don't you phone the clinic? They're in the online directory? I thanked him and went back to my car and sat in it while I checked the online phone book. I found the number of the clinic straight away, but before I could phone, my mobile rang. It was Carrie's number. Carrie. Rex. Carrie, what the hell is happening? I asked, exasperated. Is it true that they've taken you to a clinic in Anchorage? Where are you? Oh, Rex. She began to cry. It's all a lie. The whole clean air thing. They're just trying to seize your property and assets and are using the green agenda as an excuse. They're evil. Evil. Where are you? I begged. Tell me before we lose this connection. I'm not in Anchorage, but I'll be going there by plane, she replied, sounding desperate. We're due to arrive at the port of Alaska near the Cook Inlet. Where? My knowledge of Alaska was sketchy at most. So you're actually on a plane now? We haven't taken off yet, she said. I'm sharing my phone with other participants. They're going to kill us all. Do you hear me? How did you find all this out? I asked as my brain tried to piece it together. Callum, one of the program participants, told me, she said, her voice trembling. He told me the government are replacing the Earth's oxygen with another form of oxygen called Oxygent, TM, which is easier to metabolize if you have a certain approved blood type. Did you say oxygen with a T at the end? I asked. What does it matter? She shouted. I'm going to die. Do you understand that? Okay, let me think, I said with a stutter. How does Callum know all this? Are you sure this is reliable information? How the hell do I know? She nearly screamed in my ear. But he says he got this from the aircraft maintenance crew who spoke to him as we went into the plane. Look, someone else needs to use my phone. Try and get to the port of Alaska. I was shocked. Port of Alaska? When? Now. Do you understand? She screamed again and the phone went dead. I tried phoning her back, but her phone was engaged. I tried again but had no joy, but what could I do when I got there? And where was she being flown to ultimately? It also seemed highly unlikely to me that the government was cynically planning to kill whole swathes of people just to get their property and assets. This Callum could just be a crank. And as for the notion of approved blood types, it sounded like an updated form of 1930s eugenics. But it all could be true and I didn't want to take any chances. So I decided to phone the local police. I had to wait 2 minutes before my call was answered. I explained what happened as succinctly as I could to the operator, about the program and what happened when Carrie and I got here. I was then put through to the incident room and had to explain all over again. The police person I spoke to listened and then said, I shouldn't be telling you, but you are the 14th person to have phoned the precinct about this. The other 13 were using the same mobile phone number. Is this some kind of gag? You do realize that prank calls to the police are a serious offense. Officer, believe me, I'm just going on what my partner told me, I said, and I'm seriously worried for her welfare. She sounded quite desperate when she spoke to me. Sir, let me assure you that the Clean Air Program is an above-board and legitimate program which has been running for 6 years, and if there was anything fishy going on, we would know about it. And no, they don't kill people wholesale just to get their assets. It sounds like a conspiracy theory to me, sir. I would like to suggest that you were being hoodwinked as part of some kind of a sick joke. My partner wouldn't do that, I said. Leave it with me, the policeman replied, and we will get back to you if you would just confirm your contact information. I told him what he wanted to know and realized that I was really now on my own. There is only so much a person can do on a mobile phone, although I have heard of people starting and running million-dollar enterprises from their armchairs. It really is down to figuring out who to call. I did actually think about calling the FBI. After all, they are in the phone book. Even the number of the White House is in the phone book. I just had to think. The last thing Carrie said was go to the port of Alaska, but she didn't say when or what to look for. But if she was in a plane about to take off, then why would I need to go to a port of Alaska? It didn't make sense. However, it was another number I could call, and it turned out that it was an enterprise department of the municipality of Anchorage, so I called them. A lovely-sounding lady took my call, listened attentively, and then asked to call me back. When she did, she insisted that the call never happened and said she was phoning me from a private number. It's an open secret, she told me. What are you saying? Are you some sort of whistleblower? Call me what you like, she said, but I'll make it brief. Private and official aircraft land at Anchorage, ANC, all the time. Certain military aircraft carrying prisoners land there, and their passengers are transferred to designated ships which then leave the port. They return the next day with no passengers save the crew. What do you mean? I asked. Where did they go? Out to an area of water known as the Beaufort Sea, she said. And that's all I'm telling you. And they come back without passengers? I asked. Yes, she answered. So what happens to them? I begged. Maybe they were transferred to another vessel, the woman replied. Or maybe they were thrown overboard. No way, I said. What do you mean, thrown overboard? Look, this is just what I heard, she said. Also, their passports are processed on the ship before it leaves dock. And the passports are then later dumped into an industrial dumpster and then later incinerated. That's all I can tell you. At least tell me where I can find this dumpster, so I can check for myself, I said. Kongdon, she said. Kongdon. Where's that? I asked. There was a pause and then she said, it's a pet food canning plant. Kongdon Domestic Nutrition Inc. You can't miss it because the factory stinks to high heaven. It's all the horse flesh they use apparently. It's about a mile from the airport. Okay, thanks, I said. I have to go now, the woman said. Please don't ever call this number back. She abruptly hung up, but at least I now had a lead. But the implications of what she said were terrifying. It appeared that they were just chucking people overboard into freezing cold Alaskan waters. They would die from hypothermia even before they drowned. I now knew what I had to do. Get there before Carrie met that appalling fate. I gathered from what the woman at the department said that I had about 24 hours to mount a feasible rescue plan. The question was, should I just take her word for it, or should I try and get confirmation by tracking down the abandoned passports? Getting hold of several of the passports would certainly convince the police that something seriously criminal was going on. I sat in the car with a mounting feeling of desperation and tried Carrie's number again, but it was still engaged. I could only think the phone was doing the rounds and was amazed that it hadn't been confiscated yet. I drummed my fingers on the car dashboard as my mind darted all over the place, and I started up the engine, unable to think what I could do next. Of course, there were always the national newspapers, and I did know a retired journalist who had dementia and was currently in an old folks' home. Would it be worth visiting him, I wondered? However, there were always the regular newspapers, and anyone could just phone up the help desk or editorial department. I decided to put that idea on hold and put my foot down and drive to the pet food factory to see if I could locate the passports. I could only think they used the factory because they had an incineration facility. I drove a few yards and then stopped as I realized that I didn't have Cangdon's address. I soon got it on my phone, online, and put it into my sat-nav, and I was good to go. But I was conscious that valuable time was quickly passing, and that Carrie's life was slowly getting closer to being snuffed out by the forces of evil, if the situation hadn't been exaggerated. Finding her passport would confirm how dire the situation was. But then I knew that I couldn't just walk into the factory off the street and sort through their dumpsters. As an idea, it wasn't very practical, but perhaps someone there might give me the confirmation I needed. As I drove, following the sat-nav's instructions, I fished out my wallet and saw that I had several $20 bills in it. Perhaps at worst I could offer one of Cangdon's people a bribe. Surely there's no harm in asking? It took me nearly an hour and a half to get there, as I encountered some quite heavy traffic downtown. But the factory was off the beaten track, and it did smell like a kipper, and there were some guys in overalls hanging around the main gate smoking. They also had a uniformed security man in his box office talking with them. Gaining access to the passports wouldn't be easy. I pulled up and jumped out of my car and approached them. They all looked at me curiously. The man in uniform leaned out of his window of his tiny office. "Yes, sir." I stared at him, not knowing how to broach the subject. I should have thought about it before coming here. "Oh, hi," I began. I was told that there was a recycling plant in the area where I could get damaged paper products, like water-damaged stationery. The security man seemed puzzled, but he was already shaking his head. "This is a pet food plant. What do you exactly want?" "Old or damaged passport covers, for example," I said. "Leather-bound book covers." "Leather book covers? "No, we don't have anything of that nature here," he said. "But there's a stationer's in town where they do account books, if that's what you mean." "That kind of thing," I said, trying not to be too obvious. "But stuff that's being thrown away or incinerated. I could then pick it up cheaply." The security man nodded. "Do you mind if I ask what you want them for?" I had to think really quickly on my feet. There's a market for stuff like that in undeveloped parts of the world. I have a client in Mozambique who supplies businesses, colleges, and schools in Africa. Understanding came into his eyes. "So you're kinda like a wholesaler for office and paper products?" "Precisely," I said. He gently shook his head. "As I say, we are a pet food company. Perhaps the shop in town could advise you." I thanked him and realized that I would have to try another tactic. I got back into my car as if I intended to drive into town and pulled over after 100 yards to try Carrie's phone number again. But this time it was completely dead. The battery must have run out. It was then that I saw in my rear view mirror one of the guys in overalls, who had been outside the factory, come running down the road, waving to me. I wound my car window down, and he almost fell over himself, panting for breath. "Did you say passports?" he said as he leaned on my car door. "Yes, anything like that," I replied. "I might be able to help you," he said. "We let local companies use our incinerators, and as it happens, we also get discarded passport books." "Would that help?" "Very much," I said. "To you, 300 for a load," he said. "We're expecting a load today." "Who told you about the passports?" "Nobody," I replied. "I'm just going round seeing what I could pick up." "Well, you need to get out of here because security have just reported you," he said. "But be honest, you were told to come here, weren't you?" "You are not the first person to ask about discarded passports." I didn't have a ready answer. "Look, it doesn't matter," he said. We can't talk here. Can you meet me in town? It's just 3 miles down the road. Left turn at the bridge. I'll be in the Cassidy bar. I'll put today's load in my truck. There will probably be about 3 large black bags. Do you normally burn them straight away? I asked. Usually, he said. The incinerator is going 24 hours a day. You can have today's entire load for 300. That's good of you, I said gratefully. With any luck, I'd find Carrie's passport, which would confirm without doubt what I was told. But as I say, you need to get out of here, he said with urgency in his voice. Oh, by the way, do you collect hair? I gave him a look. Hair? You know, for wigs, he said. I heard that barbers sell the discarded hair that they cut, and it's turned into wigs by wig manufacturers. I shook my head. No, I don't do that. Pity we could have done business, he replied. But the bodies we turn into pet food. That's strictly hush-hush. Bodies? You mean of horses? He nodded. Yeah, horses, dead dogs, contaminated meat, dead people. My eyes must have bulged. Dead people? The people that are killed by the Clean Air Program, he said. They drown them and then the bodies are shipped to us and then they end up as cans of food for Fido and Kitty. I sort of figured you knew that because you were asking about their passports. I tried to behave normally. Oh, that, yes, I said. I didn't want him to get spooked. He gave me a doubtful look. I'll be at the Cassidy in 2 hours. I'll be outside. He disappeared through a bush on the outskirts of the factory campus, and I drove in the direction he indicated. The Cassidy bar was easy to find because it had a big sign. I drove past it, slowed down, and then parked across the street. I then tried Carrie's number again, but it was completely unresponsive. I deduced from that it had been discovered. I wondered if Carrie had yet learned fully of her impending fate. I found it hard to believe that such officially sanctioned crimes took place in this country. They might do abroad, but this was a country where the rule of law was there to protect all its citizens, not just the privileged. Such flagrant abuse of this kind was rare here, but this appeared to be on an industrial scale. It just shouldn't be allowed. Perhaps the greater the crime, the easier it was to get away with it. I was feeling a bit dizzy and realized that I hadn't eaten in several hours, so I darted into a nearby grocery and got a chicken wrap and a beer. I sat in my car eating and drinking and waiting for my newfound friend to turn up. I then realized that I needed to draw out some money to pay him. I had nearly 200 in my wallet, so it wouldn't be hard to draw out another 100. Conveniently, there was also a cash machine nearby, and so I went over and put in my debit card. At that moment, I saw a small truck drive by and swing round. It was my contact. He had already spotted me. He parked up behind me, and a moment later he exited his vehicle and came over to me holding 2 bulky black rubbish bags. Have you got the money? We agreed 400, right? He said. I thought we agreed 3, I said. It's 4, he replied firmly. I'm taking a big risk by doing this. As we were standing by the cash machine, I nodded and drew out another 100. He gave me the bags and I gave him the money. He didn't even bother to count it. He turned and walked quickly back to his truck. The name is Dell, he said. If there's anything else I can do for you? I shook my head. I was itching to go through the bags and so went back to my car and put the bags on the back seat. I saw him drive off and I headed in my car for somewhere private out of town. I stopped by a stretch of woodland and pulled over. I grabbed the first bag from the back and untied the knot at the top. Sure enough, there were dozens of passports inside. At that point, I trembled with the fear of anticipation. I felt that finding Carrie's passport would be a discovery I might not be able to handle. It would confirm my worst fears and make a reality the fantastic situation we had found ourselves in. And if I found her passport, I frankly wouldn't know what to do next. I began my search and after a while stopped looking at the photographs of the passport holders. They all stared back at me with the same expressionless stare. Would they ever dream that they would be in this predicament, I wondered. I felt like a ghoul feasting on their misfortune. Took me 20 minutes to go through the first bag with no luck, but miraculously Carrie's passport was in the first handful of passports I fished out of the second bag. It stunned me when I found it, and it was at that moment that I experienced what I could only describe as a second shock. The first one occurred when I learned that Carrie had left the facility without my knowledge. But this shock had more of an impact on me. I felt a terrible tremor in the pit of my stomach, and a sickening dizziness fell over me. I just kept staring at her photograph in the passport, unable to gather my thoughts, and bitterly wishing that I could turn the clock back. Carrie's decision to abandon her idea had come too late. I should have refused to bring her here, to this cold, apparently heartless place. I was blaming myself for not properly taking care of her. If she died, it would be my fault. So I had to act, and act fast now. And if anything happened to her, God forbid, I don't know what I would do. People have been known to go on the rampage for less. Whatever I had to do, speed was of the essence. I tried to focus and decided that before I did anything, I would try Carrie's number again. But it was now silent. Clearly she had been discovered, which could mean more trouble for her. I gripped the steering wheel and started up the car, and just couldn't decide clearly whether going to the port of Alaska was the thing to do. The question was, at what point had the passports been collected and sent to Kangadan? And did it mean Carrie had been transferred from the plane to the ship? Did this then mean that any rescue attempt by me would be a sheer waste of effort? Is it now too late to act, and how will I ever know what became of her? And then again, would that make me a target for knowing too much? What lengths were these people prepared to go to? My head was literally all over the place, and so I decided to stock up on some more beer and some sandwiches because it could turn out to be a long night. The man behind the counter gave me a funny look as I had just been in the store. I bought 4 bottles of beer, a chunk of cheese, and some rustic bread. I had a feeling I would be needing it. Once back in the car, I tried Carrie's number one more time when it suddenly rung me. I answered it at once. "Carrie, is that you?" I asked in a panic. There was a long pause. "Hello, is that Rex? This is Carlos." "Carlos? Where's Carrie?" "Don't worry, she is fine for now. She asked me to call you." He definitely had an East European accent, which immediately put me on guard. "Why can't she call me herself?" I asked. "Never mind that for now," he said. "She is paying me for my services." Services? The call abruptly ended, and I tried ringing back with no joy. I broke open a fresh beer and decided to slowly drive towards the port. It was the only thing I could think to do. I propped the phone on my dashboard, waiting for a possible call back, and took several long slugs of my cool beer. I checked for parking spaces at the port on my sat-nav and discovered that there were some allocated areas. I had a vision of myself wandering by the wharf and trying to ascertain which ship Carrie was likely to be on. I should have had the presence of mind to ask the man who gave me the bags of passports. He didn't even leave me a calling card. Checking my watch, I decided that the only option I had was to go to the port and hopefully not get arrested for trespassing. I took a couple more slugs of beer and a big bite of my block of cheese and drove as fast as I legally could, and discovered that the port of Alaska was nearer than it originally seemed. I arrived an hour later and found a multi-story car park outside the port's jurisdiction and bought a ticket. Unsurprisingly, the port was surrounded by a secure perimeter and had a manned security gate. I'd have to somehow find a way in past the security guards, which wouldn't be easy. I was also aware of security cameras perched on tall mounts everywhere. One swiveled around as I walked alongside the perimeter of the port. I decided to walk down a side road and out of sight to plan what I was going to do next. But my options seemed very limited. I dared not phone Carrie's number again, and I wish I had brought a bottle of beer for company. However, the weather was gradually getting colder, and it hadn't been warm in the first place. The only warming ingredient in beer was the alcohol, and I really needed it. I noticed that the road where I was rose to form a bit of a hill. I quickly walked up it and found that it gave me a better view of the port, and I saw 3 ships hovering around the wharf. One of them appeared to be departing, and I wondered with some alarm whether Carrie was aboard. It was then that my phone rang again. It was a different number entirely, but I answered anyway. It was Carlos. "Where the hell have you been?" he asked brusquely. "I've been trying to phone you." "I haven't been anywhere," I replied angrily. "You were the one who hung up on me." "Well, it's too late now," he said. "We've just left the dock." "I'm here," I said as panic descended on me. "What's the name of the ship?" "The Gwendoline," Carlos replied. "Carrie said you're quite well off." "What's that got to do with anything?" I asked. "It means you can pay me," he said. "I can save your girlfriend, but the price has now gone up. It will be 30,000, 10,000 in advance." I gasped. "How can I pay you any money at all if you're on the ship and it's leaving port?" There was a pause. "I'm a member of the crew, and I will arrange for you to meet one of my partners on shore. You will give him the 10,000 and he will lend you a speedboat and a pilot who you will pay separately. His fee is 2,000 in cash." "I will have to go to the bank to draw all this out," I said. "I know," he replied, "but you have to act straight away. You will pay me the rest when we return. We are heading to the Beaufort Sea. People on the program will be drugged and thrown overboard. They will be wrapped in small individual nets and fished out a couple of hours later. The bodies are then brought aboard and later sent on shore to another destination." "I already know where it is," I said. "It's a pet food factory." "Been doing your homework, have you?" he said. "Now you will board the speedboat and the driver will take you to our ship, which will be miles from shore. I will then arrange for your girlfriend to join you. She will leave the ship on the starboard side, down a rope stepladder. You need to make sure she doesn't fall into the sea because it's very cold. But I can't guarantee that it will all go to plan. It all might have to be called off. I will shine a torchlight at you from the ship when your speedboat gets near the boat, if it's good to go. But if we have to abort, I will phone the speedboat pilot." "Okay," I said. "The speedboat pilot will pick you up in Ketchikan," Carlos said. "And from there he will rendezvous with our boat." "Why should you have to abort the plan?" "It's possible we will if the captain finds out," Carlos replied. "What we will be doing is strictly illegal. What's illegal is the fact that the captain will be supervising the murder of dozens of people," I said. "We live in a different world now," Carlos replied. "I also think it's disgusting, but I'm doing really well out of it." "I bet you are," I replied. "But if you have any conscience at all, you'd be doing it for nothing." "Yeah, well, that's an argument for another day," he said with a snarl. "Just make sure you get the money. The first payment to my partner will prove you mean business. Got that?" "Yes, look and thank you," I said reluctantly. "So it's Ketchikan?" "Yeah, Ketchikan," he said. "Opposite a bandstand looking out to sea is a small quay with moored boats. It will be a red and blue speedboat. You need to give my partner the cash straight away. You need to get there as soon as you can because you've got to catch up with our ship. I'd say that we're already 10 nautical miles from shore." "What's the name of your guy, the pilot of the speedboat?" I asked. "Ken," Carlos answered. "Oh, and it will be freezing cold, so get yourself a thick jumper and anorak. Without these you'll freeze to death in the speedboat. Also, get some extra clothing for your girlfriend. Ken will wait for you, no matter how long you take to get there," Carlos said. "But you need to put your foot down, and we're already wasting time talking." He then hung up abruptly. I ran back to the car park, paid the fee and checked the sat-nav for Ketchikan. I realized I could get there in less than an hour and a half if I jumped all the red lights. But first I needed to get some clothing and managed to find a large department store en route. I bought a couple of zip-through fleece jackets, hats, and gloves, which, so I learned, were essential in the present climate. I then ran back to my car, which was being shadowed by a parking attendant, and hit the road looking for a friendly bank. I eventually found one in a small town on the way and drew out as much cash as I could. It amounted to 9,000, less than the asking amount. But I was sure I could square that with Ken. It was raining by the time I found the bandstand in Ketchikan and spotted the speedboat straight away. It was the only sea-going vessel on the quay. I put my jacket, hat, and gloves on and parked my car. I just hoped it wouldn't get towed away. Ken, who turned out to be a big Mauritian man, waved to me from the small boat. He could tell from my body language that I was looking for someone. "You Mr. Carrie?" he said as I approached him. "Call me Rex," I said. "Got the cash?" he asked as he helped me aboard. "I'm a grand short," I replied. He quickly counted what I gave him and nodded. "That's fine, but you'll need to tell Carlos." "What's in that bag?" "Shopping bag with an extra jacket in," I replied. Rain was coming into the boat, which concerned me. "Pull your hat down," he commanded as he started up the little noisy engine, and we hit the sea at a rate of knots. I realized that I would have to hold on tight. "Do you think we'll catch them up?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "Here, work this for me. It's the bilge pump. It will drain off the rainwater from the bilge. Move it back and forth." I did as he said. He gripped the steering wheel and worked the throttle at the same time. I also noticed that there was a gear shift. We were really moving. Then I had another thought. How did I know that this guy wasn't going to kill me? Maybe shoot me and throw me overboard? I wouldn't know how to defend myself. But then I had promised to pay Carlos a bigger lump sum. I'm sure it was that which was keeping me alive. Ken didn't talk much. He was just focused on the navigation of our little craft, which was heading far out into the sea. The wind, rain, and huge crashing waves were intimidating. But he would occasionally smile at me, and I felt reassured. I was actually too worried about Carrie to concern myself with my own safety. But for sure it was damned cold, not helped by the rain. No wonder sea-going people had invented all manner of devices to gauge how it was going to be on a particular day. At one point I thought the rain had turned into sleet, but working the bilge pump marginally helped me to keep warm. I was expecting it to be a long journey, but within 2 hours we were within sight of the middle-sized passenger ship, which was being tossed by the waves like a piece of flotsam. The Beaufort Sea was an unfriendly stretch of ocean, no doubt the haunt of giant mythical creatures which preferred the isolation of this bit of savage sea. However, my attention was riveted to the boat, which was virtually on the horizon. As we got closer, I could see Ken shaking his head. "Oh, damn it," he said to himself. "What's up?" I asked, perturbed. I strained my eyes and could see nothing amiss. It didn't help that this was early evening and it was starting to get dark. "Can't you see?" he said, shouting above the droning noise of our little onboard motor and turning his head to face me. "They've already started." "Started what?" I asked as I barely made out several shapes in the water around the large boat. But it was still a long way off. "They've started to throw them overboard," Ken informed me with a frown. "Can't you see all that netting? That's people. They'll haul them back up within the hour dead." "What are you telling me?" I asked as I began to shake. "Your girlfriend is either dead or dying," he said bluntly, his face sullen. "She'll be drugged up and frozen. Hyperthermia is a bitch. There's no way we can help her now. Even if we see her in the water, you can't remove the netting around her, which is made of thick nylon fiber. We'll have to turn back." "Oh no," I begged. "Please no. How can you tell she's among the dead from here? You don't even know what she looks like. When they start throwing them overboard, they do it in less than 20 minutes, he replied. "It's like a military operation. I'm authorized to return some of your cash to you. My fee will be 3,000. But can't we get a bit closer and take a look just to make sure?" I begged. He gave me a look inside. Okay, we'll go a bit closer and you'll be able to see the people for yourself. Most will be alive, that's true, but barely. Then there's a chance, I said. No chance, he replied. As I said, you can't cut through the netting. The only way to save anyone is to smuggle them off the boat before it even gets to this stage. But how do you know she isn't waiting at the top of the step ladder? I said. Because Carlos would have rung me and confirmed it, Ken answered. I know it's a hard thing to accept, but that's the way the cookie crumbles, man. As we got closer to the vessel and even as dusk fell, I could see dozens of bodies trapped and wriggling under the netting in the water, some calling out, but all sinking fast. Even from where we were, I could see their distraught faces, and some were already unconscious. The overall weight of their bodies were dragging everyone else down into the freezing water. Death was inevitable, but I didn't see Carrie, and I inwardly prayed that she didn't experience the agony of that kind of death. I slumped in my seat. It seemed that she was destined to be frozen one way or the other. I've got to turn back now, man, Ken said, giving me a sympathetic look. I'm real sorry, man. I nodded. As far as I was concerned, that really was the end. Not just for Carrie, but for me too. My emotions were somewhat numbed by the freezing cold weather, but I knew I would get their full force later when I got home. For the moment I was just in shock. Not for 1 second could she have anticipated her terrifying fate. I was baffled that such evil was being endorsed by the government, and all for money. It didn't make sense to me because the government could just print any amount of money it wanted at any time. They didn't have to take it from its citizens, and certainly not in this utterly unethical and criminal way. I was familiar with certain conspiracy theories about the hidden agenda, etc., and I have to say that some did seem to have a basis in truth. But regarding the clean air program, there were practically none. I did hear once that they were supposedly taking all the oxygen from Earth and transferring it to the moon. But that seemed like nonsense to me. Ken gave me back most of my money and said that Carlos would call me at some point and fill in the details. But to tell the truth, I was well beyond shattered and couldn't find the energy to respond to this properly. I just looked at Ken and nodded my head. I know that the tears would come eventually, but the combination of shock, disbelief, and exhaustion left me feeling bereft of any emotions at all. I was just filled with a black hole of grief and felt that there was no coming back from the pit of despair which engulfed me. We disembarked at the quay and I found that my car had been clamped. Ken had some tools which was useful, and he helped me remove the clamp which had been secured around my front wheel. By the time they catch up with you, you'll be miles away, he said. We shook hands and I drove off into the night with the intention of just getting home. Maybe to get drunk and lick my wounds or do something more drastic. I guzzled the last bottle of beer as I drove and tried Carrie's number again. I was still entertaining the vain hope that she was somehow alive, despite the odds. But I was sure Ken knew what he was talking about. He knew the nefarious routine and wouldn't have given me my money back otherwise. I rang and rang Carrie's number, but there was no answer, not even from the port authority. Carlos had craftily concealed his number, so I couldn't even get hold of him. I could only assume that the authorities had confiscated Carrie's phone and very soon the battery would run down. But it was some comfort, if very minuscule, to know that at least Carrie's phone was ringing. But by now she was dead. There could be no doubt of that. And then, while I was entertaining these bleak thoughts, suddenly my phone rang. I almost crashed my car as I quickly answered it. It was Carlos. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking up. "I had to use the wireless maritime network. We'll talk later." The signal dropped off again and then nothing. I tried phoning him back without any luck. Was he deliberately not answering me? Or were roaming signals at sea just terrible? I continued driving and found another store and bought some more beer and resumed my drive. I checked my gas and saw that it was still good because I had made provision for a long drive that morning. When I pulled up at my apartment, I had the worst migraine. My temple throbbed, and to be honest, I was a bit drunk. But this was good because it was helping me handle my loss. And then I noticed something. My apartment was on the last but one story of the apartment building, and a light had just come on. I double-checked, but then clocked a police squad car parked just up the street. It was nearly 2 in the morning, so they had to be there as a result of a call-out. Technically, I had committed a felony by calling Carrie when I shouldn't have. Were they just then waiting for me to show up to arrest me? Had the police entered my apartment? I started up the car again and did a slow 3-point turn and headed slowly up a neighboring street where I could still see my apartment. The squad car remained where it was. It disturbed me that then police might have broken in, and the only reason I could think of was the phone violation. Because normally I lived a law-abiding life. Then it occurred to me that we might have deliberately left the lights on to deter burglars. But as far as I could recall, we had turned the lights off. I sat in the car wondering what the squad car was going to do next. As we lived in a cul-de-sac, there was only one way to exit, and that was to go past my road. But as soon as I had this thought, the squad car slowly drove past and apparently didn't pay any attention to me. It was after all now dark, and frankly, I was feeling that I couldn't face going into my apartment. There was a bottle of Jack Daniels behind our little bar, and the first thing I knew I was going to do was to hit it. I tried Carrie's number one more time, but there was no answer, and all I could think about was the way she had died. That kind of death was merciless and completely bereft of any humanity. It made me wonder what kind of people were running the program. Shouldn't be allowed. A group of angry citizens needed to besiege it and hold those responsible to account. Perhaps my destiny was to organize such a protest. I just sat in my car with my sad thoughts and finally decided to go up to the apartment, at least to get some shut-eye and make some decisions tomorrow. However, there actually might be a police presence there, and so I had to be careful. Looking up at the room in my apartment with the light on, I couldn't see any sign of activity. No moving shadows. It gave the impression of being empty. So I tentatively drove round and parked openly in my parking space and went into the building. Everything was very quiet, and I decided to take the stairs instead of the elevator. I arrived at my floor feeling quite exhausted from my climb and quietly crept to the door of my apartment. I listened and then bent down at the letterbox and listened more intently. Clearly there was no one there, although this might have been a dangerous assumption on my part. I just wanted to go to bed with my bottle of booze. I inserted my key in the door lock and quietly opened the door. It swung open silently. Satisfied that no one was inside, I shut the door normally and walked through to the main lounge area where the light was. It was then that a shadow moved towards me, and a man with a knife grabbed me around my neck and held it to my chest. "Who are you?" he said, his voice sounding foreign and coarse. I was too tired to struggle. "I live here," I replied. He immediately withdrew the knife and spun me around to face him. "Rex." "Carlos," I said. "How the hell did you get in? Have you come for the rest of your money? Because I don't think you've earned it." His serious Latin face broke into a smile. "Ask her. She'll tell you whether I've earned it or not." "Her?" I repeated. I turned and saw Carrie standing there by the wall dressed in a bathrobe. Her face pale and her hair mussed as if she'd just had a shower. She ran into my arms and began to cry. I grabbed her and held her with all my might. "Just give me my money and I'll be gone," Carlos said, slipping his knife back into a side pocket. "Unless you'd like me to help you with another problem you're going to have. In which case, that will be another $5,000. "What problem?" I asked as I kissed Carrie all over her face. She responded with an ardor which spoke for itself. "You're wanted for a violation and committed a felony when you used the phone at the center." "Okay, but $5,000 for what? And why didn't you answer the phone when I rang?" "Because the number was being tracked by the authorities," Carlos replied. "They'd be able to trace where I was, where we were." "Don't you realize what I've been through?" I said. "Sure. But look, I did my very best for you," Carlos said, his face angry. She's alive and well, isn't she? If it wasn't for me, she would be dead. She'd be being processed in the pet food factory. I nodded. I'm just tired. But what's this other problem then? The cops were outside this building, Carlos said, waiting for you. I'm amazed you didn't run into them. I saw them all right, but they could have been waiting for someone else, I replied. So why did you have the lights on here? That was a mistake, Carlos said. But for all we know, they'll be back with reinforcements. Did they ring the bell? I asked. No. But my point is, you're now a wanted man, Carlos told me. So if you don't get out of here soon, like tonight, they'll be back. Even if they weren't waiting for you just then. I give it 48 hours at most. Okay, so we'll move into a hotel, I replied. No good. They'll put out an all-points bulletin, hotels included, Carlos said. No, your best bet is to come with me. I have a safe house and you can stay there as long as you like for 5 Gs. For another 5, we'll provide you with a new identity with all the documentation. And Carrie? I asked. The thing is, they think she's dead, Carlos replied. So where is this safe house? I asked. It's my mother's house in Connecticut, Carlos replied. I looked at Carrie and she nodded and smiled. Sounds good. Let's do it. Carrie's response just seemed a little too eager. You don't mind giving this place up? I asked. You have no choice, Carlos said. Pack a few things and then you can follow me in my car. The sooner we leave, the better. Carrie had best come with me in my car, I think. I pulled a face. Why is that? Because they probably know what car you drive and will be on the lookout. Oh, and have you got the money that Ken gave back to you? I left it in my glove box, I said. Okay, we'll collect it when we leave. I agreed, but something about this whole arrangement didn't sit well with me. For one thing, Carrie's body language around Carlos seemed a bit too overfamiliar, and I noticed that when he was talking to her, he placed his hand casually on her arm. It was just for a second, but I didn't like it. I packed some boxer shorts and some clothes into my small suitcase, and Carrie only took a few things herself. Now this to me was highly suspicious in itself. When we used to go on holiday, she'd take everything and the kitchen sink. So this was another sign that something wasn't quite right. But I dismissed all these perturbing thoughts, and as tired as I was, followed Carlos and Carrie out into the communal corridor of our block and down the stairwell. It was safer than taking the elevator, Carlos said in his helpful manner. But what did he mean by this exactly? The street was quiet and quite dark, and there was no sign of any trouble. However, the street lamps were designed not to be too bright, and we made our way to my parked vehicle. I unlocked it and opened the glove box and gave Carlos the wad of cash which was there. He smiled and thanked me and stuffed it into his jacket pocket. He nodded. My car's the white Honda on the other side of the road, he informed me. Just follow me in your car. I'm not going to speed. I nodded. Carrie, you sure you don't want to get in with me? She shook her head. They'll be looking for 2 people together, so best I get in with Carlos. But you'll still be 2 people, I said. Yeah, but not in our car, she replied as she walked away to catch up with Carlos, who was now on the other side of the road. I started my car and waited for Carlos to drive away in his Honda. As soon as he pulled away from the curb, I found myself surrounded by armed policemen. One of them shouted at me, "Rex Field, step out of your car and get down on the ground with your hands raised." I was stunned and noticed that Carlos was already halfway down the street and showed no sign of stopping. I had been set up, and Carrie appeared to have been a part of it. Frankly, I was speechless. One of the policemen opened my car door, and another one roughly pulled me out and onto the road. "You are under arrest," he barked at me. "Anything you say will be recorded and used in a court of law." I just stopped listening as they bundled me towards a police truck. At that point, my instinct for self-survival kicked in, and I struggled a bit but received a blow to the back of my head for my trouble, and then nothing. Everything went black. 20 years later, I regained consciousness. It was the longest sleep I had ever had. I found myself wearing a light blue dressing gown and sitting on the side of a bed in a room which I presumed was in a hospital. A woman member of staff wearing a white house coat approached me and smiled. "Mr. Fields," she said, "we were getting worried about you." "Where am I?" I asked, my mouth feeling dry. "At the Semwell Cryogenic Center," the woman replied. "I'm Dr. Blanche, and you've been awakened from a cryogenic sleep. You then just sat up a few minutes ago and have been sitting there in a kind of trance." I blinked and found that one of my eyes seemed to be glued shut. "There was a mix-up," she explained. "For some reason you took the place of a woman called Carrie Saracen. I believe she may be related to you." "That's right," I replied. "Where is she?" "I'm afraid I have no idea," the doctor said. "But you've been under for 20 years. An admin error. Sorry about that. There's since been a nuclear war." I wanted to reply, but I was feeling very weak. "Can I have a glass of water?" I asked. "I'm afraid not," she said. "All water was polluted. Will a glass of wine do for now?" "But don't worry," she informed me. "All water supplies will soon be back to normal." "A glass of wine will do fine," I said. She poured out some wine into a glass which was on the workbench and handed it to me with a large C5-sized white envelope. "For your information," she said. I glugged down the glass of wine thirstily and then tore open the envelope. It contained some sort of official explanation and an apology for the situation accompanied by a check. I blinked when I saw the amount on the check. It was for $1 million made out to my name. The doctor smiled again. "Now let's get that eye ungummed. Sometimes happens, but not to worry. Oh, and we're having red bean and onion pie for lunch today. Any allergies?" "I sometimes react to shellfish." "Well, we wouldn't serve them anyway," she answered as she bent forward to examine my eye. "All the oceans are completely radioactive." The end.